So how's the plan going? He asked with tired eyes and rubbing his forehead. I don't know, she said in sad voice and looked down at her hands. Come here. He patted the couch by his side and looked at her with soft eyes. She looked up at him, and his gentle gaze, it gave her courage, so she stood up and sat next to him. He put his arm around her shoulders, then pulled her gently to lean against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her and held her. She leaned on his chest and slowly wrapped her arms around him and snuggled even closer. She buried her face in his chest and inhaled his scent. He felt her snuggling against him and smiled a bit, then kissed the top of her head and gently ran his fingers through her hair. She liked feeling his gentle touch, and it comforted her a bit. She closed her eyes and relaxed against him. He continued to play with her hair. Then he spoke. Carlos, you know we'll figure out everything, princess? She lifted her face to look at him, feeling better when he spoke. She nodded gently and leaned her head against his shoulder. She mumbled against his shoulder. I hope so. He smiled softly at her mumbling and kissed her head again and held her tighter. He gently lifted her chin and made her look at him. Then he looked at her with warm gaze. Trust me, we'll do it, he said reassuringly, and traced her jawline with his thumb while she was looking at him with those big doe eyes that he so loved. She looked in his eyes and leaned closer to him until their noses were almost touching. She gently put her hand on his cheek and lightly traced her finger across his cheekbone, then whisked his cheekbone. I trust you. His heart fluttered at her answer. Good, he said softly, and cupped her cheek gently with one hand and traced her bottom lip with his thumb while looking at her lovingly. I know, he said and sighed tiredly. Then his hand on her cheek traced down to her neck and slowly traced small circles around her soft skin. But that old man won't just change his mind easily, he said, annoyed, and started running his fingers through her hair again. He was following her to the kitchen. We need to what? He He widened his eyes at her words and smirked, then said, Carlos, and how we're going to do that when your dad hates me? She filled a glass with water and came close to him and placed herself between his legs, leaning her back against the counter. I think I know a way. She leaned so close to his face that he could feel her warm breath. Carlos was surprised at her being bold, but he liked it. Then chuckled Carlos. And what's that brilliant plan, princess? He whispered as his hands went to her waist and pulled her closer to him. He laughed sarcastically at that and looked in her eyes. Carlos. Of course that old man would change his mind for money. He tightened his grip on her waist and leaned in a bit closer, Carl. But you're asking me to bribe him? He chuckled and raised an eyebrow at her, Carlos. You're asking me to buy you? With a smirk on his face, and he pulled her even closer to him until there was no space between their bodies, and his one hand slipped under her shirt and caressed her waist gently. So you're asking to scare him to agree to our marriage? He said, amused, and traced his hand under her shirt up towards her ribs. He chuckled and said, Carlos, I like the way you think, princess. He whispered and looked down at her neck, leaning his face there, and breathed her scent. Then he gently kissed her neck and smirked against her skin. The next day they decided to talk with her dad. They went to his office where he was there signing some papers, and he looked up at them with an annoyed face. What is it? They stood in front of his desk, and Carlos made sure to keep a cool composure, and he looked at him in the eyes. I want to talk to you about something. Dad, what is so important that it made you come in without appointment? He said, annoyed, and leaned back in his chair. He kept his gaze on him and didn't let him intimidate him. I want to talk about your daughter, he said calmly, and her dad raised an eyebrow.